Moist. Moist.
Moist.
Why do so many people have a problem with that word? It commonly features right at the top of lists of the ugliest words in our language. But surely there's worse, isn't there? Let's find out in another Rob Words. Now, if you're paying the right amount of attention to my channel, you'll have seen me asking one or two questions over the past couple of weeks. First of all, I asked my subscribers, of which you are hopefully already one. If not, you could fix that now, for their opinions on the ugliest and prettiest words in the English language. And folk were very generous in replying. Thank you if you were among those who did. The idea was that I would gather your favourite and least favourite words together and tally up the most popular / I suppose unpopular suggestions. But when I woke up the next morning, a breakfast time wave of regret washed over me as I realised I had hundreds of replies with thousands of suggestions, each of which I was going to have to read and count up. So I did what anyone in my position would do, and I started a spreadsheet, a lovely spreadsheet, and I got to work. Going through your ideas for the most beautiful words ever to trip off our tongues was uplifting, really. My mood was brightened by such euphonic joys as nuance, discombobulate, and betrothed. But going through your suggestions for the other words, the ugly ones, was frankly one of the lowest points of my career. Thank you for filling my sleep-deprived brain with such cacophonous abominations as sputum, smegma, don't look it up if you don't already know what it means, crotch, splurge, and sphincter. Here are a couple of word clouds of your suggestions. Firstly, the beautiful. We've got kerfuffle, soliloquy, susurration, and susurrus, which describe a whispering sound. There are a lot of quite obviously pleasant concepts in there. I'm deliberately not talking about the big words here yet, by the way, we'll get to them. But we also have daffodil, aurora, gorgeous. Then there are words representing frankly horrible ideas that for some reason people think are pretty. Defenestration. What, throwing someone out of a window? Really? Chlamydia and diarrhea are both in there, which people describe as sounding like dainty ladies' names. And some perverts even suggested moist. Among the uglies we've got, oh God, fetid, squelch, puke, lots of negative sounding words like that. We've also got benign words like squirrel. What's squirrel doing there? Sixth, which is difficult to say, isn't it? A lot of people say sixth instead of sixth. Anyway, gargle's on there, globule. Some people don't even like the mouthfeel of the word mouthfeel. And one of your suggestions I've actually decided is my least favourite word. It is veggies, to mean vegetables. It's okay if you're speaking to a child, but from one adult to another, saying veggies is frankly tragic. And science backs me up on that, as we'll see later. But anyway, back to our word cloud, and I of course need to mention the moist, phlegmy elephant in the room. These four big words, which were suggested far more often than any others: rural, phlegm, pulchritudinous, and old mother moist. The surprise quantity is rural, isn't it? But I gather some folk find it hard to say. It appears to be more of an American problem than a British one. In Britain we just say rural, but some American accents try to make it into a one-syllable word, so it comes out as sort of rural.
It's from my movie. The Rurger has a limited release next week.
I also think it's difficult for English learners too. That r sound is actually quite rare in other languages. Pulchritudinous is perhaps there partly because of the disconnect between its meaning and sound. It literally means beautiful, but reads like it should mean oozing with pus. Anyway, we have these four outliers, and what do you know? YouTube just so happens to allow you to run a poll with a maximum of 4 options. So I put the question to the masses: which of these 4 is truly the ugliest word in our language? And over with our beautiful words, again, we have a top 4. Mellifluous, ethereal, serenity, and luminescence. They all have a similar vibe to them, don't they? Mellifluous just means sounds nice, doesn't it? So I'm not really surprised that that's there. I'm very sad that soliloquy missed out on the top 4, by the way, but here we are. So let's put those 4 to the public too. Which is the most beautiful word in the English language? Well, I can tell you, I already put those 8 words to my subscribers and they voted in their thousands. Perhaps you were among them. And we do have a winner / loser, I suppose, for the most beautiful and the ugliest words in the English language. They are Well, obviously, I'm not going to tell you that now. You're going to have to wait until the end of the video because that is how the internet works. First, we need to understand what makes us think a word is either beautiful or ugly, and we'll get onto that in a sec. But in all of our discussion of pretty words, there's one word that hasn't come up so far: tariff. That's despite the current president of the United States calling it the most beautiful word in the dictionary. Now, whether or not you agree with him on that may depend on where you get your news. But with this video's sponsor, Ground News, you get the whole picture. One of the latest developments in the tariffs tale is the US trade deal with the UK that will reduce tariffs on British cars, steel and aluminium. On that story alone, Ground News brings together over 500 sources from either side of the Atlantic so that we can compare the language and the perspectives. Right-leaning outlets generally celebrate the deal using words like triumphant, whereas left-wing news sites are more sceptical, flagging up fears it could be a con on American workers. I've been working with Ground News for a while now because I think it's never been more important to understand the biases and reliability of where you get your news, and Ground News gives you all of the tools to do that. Plus, its handy blind spot feature makes sure you don't miss stories that only one side of the argument is covering. If you want to see how language shapes the news and stay fully informed, go to ground.news/robwords or use my special QR code to get 40% off unlimited access to the Vantage plan like I have. That comes out at $5 a month. Give it a go. Now, earlier I mentioned that moist found its way onto both the ugly and beautiful word lists. So which is it? Well, the overwhelming view seems to be that it is a disgusting word. Check out this article from the HuffPost's Food and Drink department a few years back. Their writers were so sickened by the word moist that they came up with 5 inventive ways to avoid using it. None of them successfully replace moist, in my opinion. Not dry? Hydrated? Good crumb? I don't even know what that means. Spongy? No. Divine? Come on. But you can see that they're really going out of their way to keep moist out of their mouths. Around the same time, the New Yorker magazine invited readers to select a word to eliminate from the English language forever, and they chose moist. Although the New Yorker overruled its readers, saying, without moist, how would bakers, meteorologists and amateur pornographers describe slight wetness? In the end, they got rid of the word slacks, although I believe they're still available. The brilliant linguist Mark Lieberman, a friend of this channel, having come on to tell us all about eggcorns, a word he helped to invent, he wrote about moist as an example of the phenomenon of word aversion. He said, some people react in this way to words whose offence seems to be entirely phonetic: cornucopia, hardscrabble, pugilist, wedge, whimsy. None of these words made our list, by the way. In other cases, it's plausible that some meaning-related associations play a role. Creamy, panties, for goodness sake, Mark, ointment, tweak. He goes on, overall, the commonest object of word aversion in English, judging from many discussions in web forums and comment sections, is moist. So he investigated further. How far back does this moist aversion go? Well, he carried out some rough research using a big database of all the words used in the works of 50 famous authors from centuries past. And the research suggested that a lot of them were avoiding moist too. Jane Austen, for example, never used the word once. Not once. It seems that generally the authors were more comfortable using the word dry than moist, as this violin plot shows. I don't like the look of this graph, but I don't want to say why. I think pink was a bad choice of colour. Anyway, it turns out moist probably gave Mark Twain the creeps too. He used it only once, which was disproportionately low compared with his uses of wet and damp. However, as our cheeky little survey shows, some people at least claim to like moist. So which is moist? Gorgeous or gross? Is there a way that we can judge objectively, ideally stripping away all soggy associations and just looking at the sound of the word itself? Well, yes, there is, because another of the great linguistics communicators of our time, alongside Mark Lieberman, David Crystal, did the hard work for us back in 1995. He collected together lots and lots of words that had been at one time or another described as beautiful by other linguists, by poets, and by the general public, and he analysed them for patterns. Were there common characteristics among these so-called beautiful words? Well, he concluded that Yes, there were. He found, for example, that the letters L and M, or the sounds L and M, appeared most frequently and in a greater proportion of the beautiful words than in everyday conversation. He also found that the sounds S, N, R, K, T and D were often present too. Those are the consonants. As for vowels, he brilliantly noticed that beautiful words had a tendency towards vowel sounds made at the front of the mouth. Sounds like E, I, E, A. And in words with multiple vowels, they often started at the front of the mouth and moved backwards in the mouth during the course of the word. Funnily enough, and I do think it's just a coincidence, David's surname, Crystal, is on his list of beautiful words. And that's because a lot of people do think the word crystal is beautiful. And that starts with a front vowel, I, and ends with a mid one, O, I, O, crystal. See? He also found vowel sounds tended to move upwards in the mouth too. What's more, generally short vowel sounds are favoured over long vowels and diphthongs. Those are the ones where you start by making one vowel sound and finish making another, like oi. And here's a really interesting thing. We generally find long words more attractive. David Crystal concluded that to be beautiful, a word should ideally have 3 syllables or more, and also that the emphasis or stress should fall on the first of those syllables. So from his research, he was able to create a kind of checklist of criteria against which you could assess a word's objective beauty. And he turned it into this matrix. Up top, he put tremulous, which scores a 10 out of 10. He also came up with 2 more notionally perfect words, ramilon and dremetol, which both sound like prescription medications, but also score 10 out of 10. We'll see how the beautiful words from our survey fit in later, but the interesting thing here is that not only does David Crystal's matrix give us a formula for pretty words, it can arguably tell us if a word is objectively ugly too. The fewer criteria it meets, the worse the word is, right? Based on this, David Crystal says the word zoo is about as ugly as it gets, scoring 0 out of 10. So what about moist? That's why we're here, isn't it? Well, let's see. So it's only 1 syllable long, no points there, but it does have that sound, which is good, and it has other beautiful consonants in there as well, the s and the t. It has none of the ugly consonants from David Crystal's list, and it has 3 different manners of articulation for m, s and t. It doesn't score any points for vowels because of that diphthong, but look at that, it gets 4 out of 10, which is only just below average, isn't it? It's not particularly ugly. It's not sexy, but it's not particularly ugly. Moist is largely made up of attractive consonants, and actually the rest of it is oi, which is a word, and a word that, believe it or not, featured in the top 70 English words as voted for by non-native speakers. So moist has more going for it than you might think. Now let's look at how all 4 of our ugly words perform based on David Crystal's criteria, and they're all basically bang average. The 4 for phlegm is remarkably high in my opinion, but it's because it's got that l sound and it's got that m sound, and it has a short vowel in the middle. In fact, Mr. Crystal also ran the numbers for phlegmatic, which starts with phlegm, doesn't it? And he found it got a positively pulchritudinous 7 out of 10. Pulchritudinous itself benefits from just being long, really, and I've treated rural as a 2-syllable word here to give it 5 because it then has the emphasis on the first syllable, rural. But if you do pronounce it as 1 syllable, then it loses a point and becomes 4 out of 10. So how about our 4 beautiful words? Well, check these out. We have another couple of 5s, actually. Ethereal and serenity lose valuable points for having their stressors on the second syllable. However, mellifluous and luminescence score 7 out of 10 apiece. Glorious. Those L's and M's really pay off for them, plus the S sounds in there, and also the flow of the vowels, all benefiting mellifluous and luminescence. Let's test out some more of our ugly suggestions. Someone said hashtag, 5 out of 10. Squelch, 4 out of 10. Crotch, oof, 3 out of 10. Oh, and let's just put diarrhea in and see what comes splashing out. 5 out of 10, so it really could go either way. This is all a bit gross, isn't it? But just before we finish, one more. You see? I told you it was gross. Veg gets the same, but check out vegetables. Yeah, So can we just call them vegetables, please? Okay, moving on. What David Crystal's criteria do not take into account is the meaning of a word, and that was very deliberate on his part. But I think we can pretty obviously see when we look at the lists we've generated that there are thematic patterns. I mentioned our top 4 beauties all had a similar vibe, and they do, don't they? On the word cloud in general, words associated with light are overrepresented. Words like aurora, celestial, and of course luminescence. People love a good essence word. There are also a lot of words associated with joy and calm, euphoria, tranquility, lullaby. Whereas on the other side of the argument, words related to certain bodily functions take up more than their fair share of the ugly spots. Fecal, sputum, ulcer, as do words for sounds like squelch, gargle, gurgle, and grunt. By the way, there is a pretty clear bias against g words as well. But it seems like when asked to come up with beautiful or ugly words, people either naturally factor in the meaning as part of their interpretation of the question, or unconsciously struggle to decouple the words from the concepts that they represent. And it's at this point that I have to make a confession. I have to tell you that this word cloud is not quite as it should be. Because if I actually put in every single suggestion I received, what it should have looked like was this. Now what do you notice? Do you see that 2 new big words have appeared? We now have the words cellar and door. But that is not because people found either of those words particularly attractive. It's because a whole host of people said that they liked the sound of those 2 words together. That's right, a lot of people think, or at least say they think, that the phrase cellar door is the most beautiful sounding term in the English language. How can that possibly be? Well, it's a long story, and it's one that starts in 1903 with the publication of a book called G-Boy, in which, during a discussion about words divorced from their meaning, the narrator describes how an Italian savant maintained that the most beautiful combination of English sounds was cellar door. This idea has then been kicked around by other authors ever since. The likes of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis have both extolled the mellifluous virtues of the cellar door. A little more recently, although still a quarter of a century ago, my God, it was mentioned in the film Donnie Darko too.
Cellar door is the most beautiful.
And did you know that the production company originally behind Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was called Cellar Door, in a deliberate nod to the cosmic beauty of the phrase cellar door? Now I hope you can see why I had to leave cellar door out of the final word cloud and the final ballot. Why? Because it isn't a flipping word, is it? It's 2. But it definitely deserves an honourable mention, so here it is getting one. Okay, I've kept you waiting long enough. It is time to find out, firstly, which of our veritable verbal hotties, you and thousands of others, have voted the most beautiful word in the English language. Here are the results. Wow, so more than a quarter of people went with luminescence, but it is ethereal that has won the day by, a pretty clear margin. Serenity is in 3rd and mellifluous in 4th. Not quite mellifluous enough, it seems. Thank you so much if you voted on that one. Well done to ethereal. But next, and this is the big one, isn't it really? Which word did the best part of 20,000 people decide was the ugliest word in the English language? Has moist lived up to the soggy, cacophonous hype? Well, I can tell you, no. Because here are the results, and it is phlegm that has won with a landslide. More than half of voters said it was the grossest word of all. The discordant pulchritudinous came 2nd with just over a quarter of the vote. Moist has to settle for 3rd, and rural is where it ought to be really, in 4th. So there we have it. Phlegm has retched and heaved its way to the top of the disgusting word tree. I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of the best and worst words the English language has to offer. I am indebted to so many people for the research they've done into this in the past, so I will include links to their work below. I'll see you in whatever you choose to watch next. In the meantime, take care. Phlegm. Phlegm. Phlegm.